So we looked at this incident in this chapter involving Elisha the prophet and a destitute widow. Following the death of her husband, she found herself deeply in debt, so much so that her creditor threatened to force her sons into slavery until those debts could be repaid. So then she approached Elisha for help, and he gave her some very unusual instructions. I'm reading now from 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning at the end of verse 2. He said, "What do you have in your house?" And she said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil." Then he said, "Go, borrow vessels," so jars, pitchers, anything that would hold liquid, "from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels." That's important. "But do not gather just a few." In other words, get as many as you can. Maybe up to 100, possibly more than that. "And when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour it, your solitary jar of oil, into all those vessels, and set aside the full ones." Which she proceeded to do. And from one jar of oil, she filled, who knows, maybe 100 jars, certainly scores and scores of jars, a great miracle. And then, once that was done, he told her to go sell the oil, pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest. What a miracle. How God came through for this woman. And there's two fundamental lessons. Number one is to obey God's commands, even when they don't make sense, because it will be worth it in the end. In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 9, we read that Jesus became the author of eternal salvation, the greatest end of all, to those who obey him, to do what he asked us to do. And the second lesson from this story is that God always provides for his people. In Philippians 4, verse 19, Paul wrote, "And my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus." Yet there's another incident in this chapter which likewise teaches us some very, very valuable lessons. So let's pick up at verse 8, again, 2 Kings chapter 4. "Now it happened one day that Elisha went to Shunem." Shunem was a small town about 15 miles southwest of the Sea of Galilee, where there was a notable woman. Notable means she was obviously known, possibly due to her wealth. That word notable in the Hebrew can be translated as affluent or wealthy. In fact, some translations just say she was a wealthy woman. Well, anyway. "And she persuaded him, Elisha, to eat some food." So apparently she was told of him coming into their town, or maybe she noticed it herself, and saw that he was traveling and apparently tired and certainly hungry. So it was as often as he passed by. So apparently he decided to frequent this area, and possibly due in part to the hospitality of this woman, he would turn in there, her home, to eat some food. And I don't think he did this to take advantage of her. I think she continually persisted in persuading him, "Hey, you've got to come in and have something to eat." And then she went a big step past that. "And she said to her husband, 'Look, now, I know that this is a holy man of God.'" I mean, this is a genuine prophet, "'who passes by us regularly. Please, let us make,'" which means construct, build, "'let us make a small upper room on the wall.'" On the wall, that means they were living in a fairly large, certainly stable, well-built house. "And let us put a bed for him there, and a table, and a chair, and a lampstand, so it will be whenever he comes to us that he can turn in here." In other words, she asked her husband, let's build him an apartment, furnished apartment, so whenever he's in town, he always has a place to stay. You know, that's not unlike what Edon and Betty Jones did when they built an apartment on their house for Betty's mother in her latter years. I mean, that's hospitality, folks. Verse 11. And it happened one day that he came there, and he turned in to the upper room and lay down there. And on this occasion, apparently, the woman's hospitality gets him to thinking. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Call this Shunammite woman." When he had called her, she stood before him. Now, it's kind of a little confusing. She actually stands before Gehazi. If I understand the culture, at that time it was improper, inappropriate for a woman to go into a men's room, especially someone not her husband. So she's kind of outside the room as I picture this. So he's telling Gehazi what to say to her. Because it says when he had called her, she stood before him. But you'll see this is Gehazi that she stands before, that facing her, talking. And he, Elisha, said to him, Gehazi, "Say now to her, look, you have been concerned for us." So they also allowed Gehazi to stay there with Elisha. "With all this care, what can I do for you? Do you want me to speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army?" Which likely meant requesting that she be provided for in times of famine, or maybe protected in times of war. And her answer is interesting. She answered, "I dwell among my own people." Well, what answer was that? Well, basically, it was a nice way of saying, I don't need that. I'm with my people. She had relatives, close friends all around her. In other words, if she were to come in a time of need or even needed some protection, she was confident the people in her city, her village, would help. Because you see, she'd probably been very hospitable to them as well. And many of them probably felt, if she ever needs anything, we're going to make sure to be there for her. Verse 14. So he says, now he's speaking to Gehazi again, probably the next day or shortly thereafter. "What then is to be done for her?" And Gehazi answered, "Actually, she has no son, and her husband is old." So he said, "Call her." So she comes back. When he had called her, she stood in the doorway. Again, she doesn't actually enter the room. But now he communicates a little more directly to her, being that she's that close. Then he, Elijah, said, "About this time next year, you shall embrace a son." She said, "No, no, my Lord. Man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." How could you say such a thing? Apparently, she'd been wanting children for years, or at least one child, and been disappointed time and time again. Her husband is much older, apparently. So how can this be? Why would you say such a thing? In other words, don't get my hopes up, especially at my age or my husband's age. Verse 17. But the woman conceived and bore a son when the appointed time had come, of which Elisha had told her. When I see this, I think how happy this woman had to be. I guess it reminds us of God's awareness for those of us with deep, unsatisfied desires, or when we experience long-term disappointments. We have a song, "Does Jesus care?" Oh, yes, he cares. His heart is touched with my griefs. Well, we continue, verse 18. And the child grew. Now it happened one day, he went out to his father, to the reapers, kind of to watch what's going on. And you're going to see the son is still very young. He might just be 5, 6, 7 years of age. And he said to his father, while he's out there watching, "My head, my head." So he, the father, said to a servant, "Carry him to his mother." So apparently, again, he's small enough that he can be carried. When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees, again indicating he's still very young, the boy, and then died. Based on the symptoms, possibly from a cerebral hemorrhage from a ruptured aneurysm in the brain, something like that anyway. And she went up, and this is interesting. Most mothers would just mourn and hold that child and just... She doesn't. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God. So Elisha is not home. That's the only reason she'd go into the room. She probably went in there constantly to dust it, to clean it, whatever, make sure he had everything in there. Now she's going to lay her son on Elisha's bed. Shut the door upon him and went out. Let me ask you, why did God allow this woman, so kind, so hospitable, to have a child that she apparently wanted for a long time, just to know that he would die in a few years? We'll come back to that. Verse 22. Then she called to her husband and said, "Please, send me one of the young men and one of the donkeys, that I may go as fast as possible to the man of God and come back." The husband apparently has no idea that his son is dead, just thought maybe his son had a bad headache and was just being cared for at the house. So the husband said, "Why are you going to him, the prophet, today? It is neither the new moon nor the Sabbath. It's not a time of sacrifice or worship." Note her answer, and she said, "It is well." You know, what we would say is, everything's all right, no worries. But it wasn't. Why would she say that? Well, go to verse 24. We'll come back to that. Then she saddled the donkey and said to the servant, "Drive." In other words, she's insistent. "And go forward. Do not slacken the pace for me, unless I tell you." So she departed, probably hearing, or maybe Elisha told her before he left, where he would be going for a few days. She departed and went to the man of God at Mount Carmel, a place of not that many years earlier, a very famous contest with Elijah the prophet. And by the way, that's a trip of about 45 miles. Back then, you'd have to have an animal to make that trip in one day. All right. So it was, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to his servant Gehazi, "Look, the Shunammite woman. Please run now." He sensed something's just not right here. Why would she be making this trip? And he could see she's in a hurry. "Run now to meet her and say to her, 'Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with your child?'" So Elijah was concerned something was wrong for her to be coming all this way and so quickly. And Gehazi reaches her, and she answered Gehazi, "It is well." Every time I read this, I think, what? And maybe she was just hiding the fact that something was horribly wrong, because she wanted to talk to Elisha. And had she said much to Gehazi, he might have made some deal about, well, we need to do this or that. So she goes straight to the prophet. Now, when she'd gone to the man of God at the hill, she caught him by the feet. So she literally falls and grabs him around his feet like someone would tackle someone, except she's not going to take Elisha down. She's just going to hold on to him. But Gehazi came near to push her away. It's like, what are you doing? But the man of God, Elisha, said, "Let her alone. Her soul is in deep distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me." Now that's kind of unusual. He wouldn't have said this if it hadn't been unusual. So he's kind of puzzled, and we'll come back to that. So she said, and this is going to basically give Elisha the information he needs. "Did I ask for a son of my Lord?" She never asked for a son. Elijah just found out that she was childless and apparently wanted one. But she didn't ask for it. And then she continues, "Did I not say, 'Do not deceive me'?" And he puts two to two together in his mind. Something's wrong with the son. He's probably dead. So she was basically saying, Elisha, wouldn't I have been better off not having a son than to have one that dies? We continue, verse 29. Then he, Elisha, said to Gehazi, get yourself ready. He knows this is an urgent matter. And take your staff. Take my staff in your hand and be on your way. Go right to our house there, that apartment. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. Don't even take time basically to say hello. And if anyone greets you, do not answer him. Go straight to that house. Let nothing stop you. And lay my staff on the face of the child. Why does Elisha say to do that? Because he believes that will bring the child back to life and good health. Elisha believed that, or he wouldn't have given that order. Verse 30. And he's supposing the mother would follow Gehazi, right? No. That's not good enough for her. And the woman of the child said, as the Lord lives and your soul lives, I will not leave you, Elisha. I'm going to stay right here with you. So Gehazi's already starting out. She's not going to budge until Elisha does. That's what she's doing here. So he arose and followed her. Now, Gehazi went on ahead of them and laid the staff on the face of the child. He did exactly as instructed, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Nothing happens. Therefore, he went back to meet him. He goes back as Elisha and the mother are coming, meets them, and told him, probably pulls Elisha aside from the mother, said the child has not awakened. And again, Elisha has to be a little puzzled. Verse 32, when Elisha came to the house, there was the child lying dead on his bed. He went in, therefore, shut the door behind the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. I think Elisha was confused at this point, and he's just praying, like, why and what now? I'm just guessing. We're going to pause the story here because I want to address those questions that are connected with this. Number one, why did God allow this woman to have a son, knowing that he would die at a very young age? Number two, why did God hide the death of the boy from Elisha, which puzzled Elisha? Because he had no idea why the woman was coming. And apparently at other times God told him about such things because he was stunned about that. And question number three, why didn't the boy revive when Gehazi follows Elijah's directives to the letter, doesn't greet anybody, doesn't respond to anybody, goes straight to the house and lays Elisha's staff on the boy's face? Why? You know, the best answer is not the one we want, but it's the best. Deuteronomy 29:29, the secret things belong to God. The things that have been revealed to us and our children, yes, but not everything. But the reason I'm sharing this morning, I want to venture a guess. Maybe a wild guess, but maybe it makes sense. All these things may have been connected with God wanting to test the faith of the woman and Elisha, and hopefully increase that faith. Now let me explain. Was it hard for the Shunammite woman to believe in God and his power when she became pregnant and then gave birth to a healthy baby boy? Obviously, there's no problem with her faith then. I mean, her faith was just growing. But how about when he dies? What happens to the faith? Where does it go? How strong is it? How about Elisha? You know, God had allowed him to perform numerous miracles before this event, including that jar story we talked about. So would his faith be as strong when God withheld information from him? And when his original directive for bringing the boy to life failed? I don't think Elisha had ever experienced that before. And, as we'll talk more about next week, when it required his personal presence and some time and some effort to bring the boy back. Well, I'm certain that despite the aforementioned issues, the faith of both the woman and Elisha not only endured, but was stronger as a result. I mean, after all, the woman did go to Elisha when her son died. She didn't have to. But didn't she have some hope if she did? Sure. And Elisha, even though these things didn't happen as he thought they should and would, he still goes to the boy to help. So his faith is still there. Now, God may have had a different reason than these for these things. But regardless, we can learn a very valuable lesson. Sometimes my prayers and yours are answered in short order. When that happens, what happens to our faith? It grows, right? Expands, multiplies. And sometimes we pray fervently and the answers are delayed. I mean, sometimes delayed for a long time. What happens then? Our faith is tested. And I think anybody who says it isn't would be maybe a little bit dishonest. But how about if our prayers are answered and then reversed, negated? Folks, that's when our faith is viciously attacked. Consider the Wirt family and their recent experience with Shauna back in December of last year. How she had been in such serious condition, was going steadily downhill. And then things turned around. And she was doing so well that they were already projecting her release date and her return to the Upper Peninsula. And everybody was smiles all around. And then one night, after all those thousands of prayers, it all reverses. And she goes downhill, unexpectedly, surprising even the doctors, and never recovers. Many of you can understand maybe what Paul and Jan Arms went through during the final year of Ty's life, or what Corey and Karen Willett went through in September of 2009. You might be going through something right now that makes you feel like your faith is just hanging by a thread. And if that's the case, don't let go of that thread. Because if you hang on, God will bring you through. And I don't care what it is. Listen to Paul, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, reading verses 8 through 10. He's talking about one of the worst moments in his life as an apostle and other apostles too. He says, "We do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, of our trouble," and I mean spelled with a capital T, "that came to us in Asia. That we were burdened beyond measure." We'd never had anything like this happen. "Above strength." In other words, they didn't have strength to deal with it. "So that we despaired even of life." We were convinced this is it. We're all going to die. Yes, we had the sentence of death in ourselves. You know what that means? We sentenced ourselves at that point to die. There was no hope. But God allowed this, and you'll see from his next statement, for a purpose. That we should not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. Why did God allow us to go through this time of terrible turmoil and stress and uncertainty? God's saying, no matter what it looks like, you still look at me. And listen, who delivered us from so great a death. It was just that certain. And does deliver us. He hasn't stopped. In whom we trust that he will still deliver us. That applies just as much as you and me when we're coming to those times or experience those times where our faith seems like just a threat. In Psalm 34:19, David wrote, "Many are the afflictions, hardships of the righteous." David suffered much more than we'd have time to go into, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. And God will deliver us. And I close with this point. In this story that we just read, and we're not finished. We'll finish next week, God willing, but what was the greatest demonstration of faith in this? And it's really interesting. It's easy to overlook. Verse 23. The husband of the Shunammite woman asked, "Why are you going to him today? Why do you want to go to see the prophet? It is neither the new moon nor the Sabbath." And what did she say? "It is well." She wasn't really lying, but I believe she was speaking by faith. You know, I don't want to trouble you with what's going on here, but it's going to be okay. I just need to go to the prophet. She had some real faith here. And she says the same thing in verse 26 when she's going toward Elisha and Gehazi meets her and says, "Is it well with you and your husband and your son? Or everything okay?" And she said, "It's well. If I can just see this man." So I guess we need to pray more for faith during those hard times, don't we? Just as the apostle on one occasion said to Jesus, "Lord, increase our faith." If anyone needs to respond to the invitation, we would ask you to come up forward, have a seat on the front pew, and we'll assist you. If you need to come, please do so as those of us who can stand and sing the song.